Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast, Day 6, our final day here live in Indianapolis covering the 2023 NFL Combine. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I am joined for the final time in person, for this week at least, by my producer, JT. How are you, my man?
I am tired.
Tired.
I'm tired,
Sure.
But I'm also good.
Good. Good. Well, we appreciate everyone tuning in. Real quick, before we get into the meat of today's show, if you are with us live already, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Do me two favors real quick. First, if you wouldn't mind going and watching in the YouTube version of this live stream, if you go to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, leave a comment in there letting us know that we can be seen and be heard by you all. Would appreciate somebody doing that, just giving us a heads up. That's the only place where you can leave comments that we can see them on our end, unfortunately, because of the way that Twitter handles the live streams. So go to YouTube, Broadway Sports Media's page. You can find this live stream, and somebody in the comments down below, leave a response letting us know that everything is good. You can see and hear us, and we will get underway. The second thing I need you to do is help us spread this live show. It's our final one here in Indianapolis for the week, and we want as many eyeballs here to be able to listen to what we have to say, as well as chat with us. And we would love to talk back and forth a little bit about your thoughts, opinions, all of that good stuff from this week, which has been really a fun one for us. I think a really entertaining combine, a good number of narrative storylines to follow, some really great players, some interesting players that we've been covering. Thank you, Kenneth, for letting us know that you can hear us loud and clear. Very much appreciate you for that. And so if you all wouldn't mind retweeting, reposting, sharing, liking, sending a text to a friend, letting them know to come tune in. Appreciate that. All right, JT, before we get into the players that we saw test today on the final day, we talk a little bit about what the week's been like for us, a little behind the scenes maybe, and we're going to do a recap show later this week, probably on Wednesday, of our overarching thoughts from the Combine. After we get home tomorrow, we'll both sit down, gather our number one thoughts and takeaways from this week, the number one things that we saw and heard and think carry value, because half the battle here is trying to figure out what matters and what doesn't. You are having to sift through the pile a little bit in that regard, but there are a number of things that really do matter. So we're going to review the entire week later this week. Today, we're talking about the linemen and the running backs who both did their athletic testing, closing out the week for the Combine in Lucas Oil Stadium. But overall, what were your thoughts on the week? Being here, being able to, Kenneth, don't get ahead of yourself. We're going to get there in just a minute. We want to talk about what the week was like for you and what your experience was like.
I thought it was, I should have prefaced how I was feeling earlier. Like, it was an amazing week. I had so much fun, and there was so much information, so much going on, and it was our first experience here. And I think it was a great first experience being at the Combine. I don't have any regrets on how I would do it again, because it's kind of tricky to figure out what the vibe is and when you come here for the first time.
Sure.
But it was still a draining week, so much information and so much to do. So I'm going to take a 2-day nap or so once I get back.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is. No event, no week, I think, is better described by the popular phrase, work hard, play hard. This is the NFL spring break, as they affectionately refer to it as. They call it that for a good reason, because it really is. It's a very bizarre week, crazy week of bumping elbows, meeting folks, networking, getting to talk to prospects and coaches and GMs and see these future stars of the league do all of their athletic testing in the very strange but entertaining Underwear Olympics. Got to meet a lot of awesome people. We got to do a good bit of networking, probably met some folks that we'll have on the show in the coming weeks before the draft. Some really talented, really interesting folks that we hope you all will enjoy, and hope liked us enough this week to be willing to come on when we hit them up and say, hey, wouldn't you mind hopping on the show with us? So we'll see about that. But a lot of really cool names and places here in Indianapolis. I'd never been to Indianapolis in earnest. I'd been through the town. I'd stayed outside of town before. Never stayed in the downtown area, never really explored downtown, but it's got more to offer than I would have guessed.
It's got a lot of pretzels.
It's the city of pretzels. We've noticed every single place we've been, which is mostly sports bars and like that kind of scene for a restaurant. We went to one nice restaurant, St. Elmo's, but even there, everybody has a pretzel on the appetizer menu, like a soft pretzel, and they're good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. I don't know what the deal is with Indianapolis and pretzels. That's enough of our bantering. Let's talk about what the people are here to talk about, and that is the combine. Except our first topic isn't about the combine, so we'll get this out of the way here at the top. It is the late breaking, maybe 15, 20 minutes before we went live here, news that Titans defensive tackle and star Jeffrey Simmons, who is about to be on his fifth year, his fifth year contract this upcoming season, the final year of his rookie contract. He is, as of this afternoon, no longer following the Titans on Instagram, nor does he have any pictures of him in Titans gear on his Instagram. Deleted basically everything besides 4 or 5 photos.
It's
mostly
the end of the world.
Yeah, the sky is falling. The floor is opening up beneath us and devouring us all into the core of the earth, because Titans Twitter obviously not very happy about that, very scared by that. He also, it seems, deleted his Twitter account, or deactivated it at least, because you can't find him there either at Grind Simmons. So what that means, we do not know. I will say personally, I don't put a lot of stock into what players do on social media. I did. And then the past 2 or 3 years, really, it's become this customary thing that not just the most dramatic or most disgruntled players do, because that's really how it started. It was the guys who were the most frustrated with their team trying to make a statement by unfollowing them on social media, which in today's day and age is essentially firing a warning shot across the bow of the ship at your adversary, even though it's the team that you're employed by. And I guess it started with guys who weren't wanting to still be employed by those teams. They were trying to get traded by those teams. They were the Deshaun Watsons of the world, not very happy, trying to get out of town. It's now become this customary thing in the NFL and really in all major sports, but in the NFL for sure. Players, I think, are being advised by their agents to do this. I've spoken to Jeffrey Simmons. I'm not friends with Jeffrey Simmons, but I'm acquainted with him and the way that he operates. And he doesn't seem like the kind of thing that he would do out of spite. I really do think he probably was told by his agent or somebody he trusts, or maybe fellow players that have done the same thing, that when you're in a period of your career where you're in contract negotiations, looking to get your first big boy deal, and he's going to get a big boy deal from somebody. I would tell you it's almost certainly going to be the Titans. Everything that we've seen and heard indicates that they want him here. He wants to be here. This is the guy that was openly inviting Bobby Wagner to come to Tennessee just 10 seconds ago online, it seems. He's forever been consistent about the fact that he wants to stay here in Tennessee, that he's confident there's going to be no problem getting a contract worked out, that his team is on it and he's not concerned about that. He's just trying to work. So all of those things, if you want to let his actions that come with no explanation on a random Sunday afternoon at the very beginning of March speak louder to you than his words have spoken for the past 6 months, 12 months, however long he's been asked about it, then go for it. I understand that even as a fan who recognizes this seems to be customary practice by everybody in the league at this point, it still is not. It's not a great feeling to look at that as a fan. One of your star players is going through this period of their contract negotiations. It's nerve-wracking. So I understand being scared about it, being upset about it, not being a fan of it. It's not a good thing. There's no world in which it's a good thing. But I would argue it's not necessarily a bad thing, and certainly not something worth freaking out over.
Yeah, 2 things on that real quick. One, I think Alan Bell replied about your tweet to it, saying, hey, this is something that Debo did last season amongst many others, but specifically Debo, and came right back to his team and they were able to work out a deal, which leads to my point that this is something Rand Carthen at least has been in the building for since it happened to his old team in the 49ers last year.
Good point.
So he understands what's going on. I don't think he's
You mean when Debo Samuel did this exact thing and
Yes.
then he signed with the 49ers?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. The only other thing I'll say on it, which is why I don't think it's a big deal, he still follows T-Rack on Instagram. the Titans mascot. So signed, sealed, delivered. Never mind.
Right,
I'm not
right.
buying into it at all.
He still loves the Titans because he follows T-Rack. Obviously,
course.
that's the answer here. If you all watching us live have an opinion or a question or a thought on Jeffrey Simmons' social media, not antics, but actions this afternoon, would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment over at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page on this live stream. That comment section is where you'll be able to get your comment read by us and thrown up on the show. So go watch this over there and not on Twitter or Facebook. Now that we've got that out of the way, and I really don't have any more thoughts on that, I think it's going to be a discussion over the coming weeks. If I had to put money on it, I've not heard anything from the people that I know inside the building about the timeline, but the general vibe seems to be from both the team's camp and Rand Carthon, as well as Jeffrey Simmons. It seems to me that they're going to be getting this handled sooner than later. And if anything, I kind of feel like this may be a negotiation tactic, like S-Rob points out on YouTube. I agree, S-Rob, in the sense that I think it's, if anything, Simmons camp trying to push the timeline a little bit, maybe light a little fire under the butts of the organization and say, hey, how about we get this figured out sooner than later, which should be in the team's best interest as well. You'd think it's what they would like to do, because the longer you wait, we got our gear falling apart. Just hold on to that.
I'm gonna hold on to it. It was fun. Last day.
Last day. Well, yeah, it's right. Last day.
Falling
Something
apart.
was bound to happen. When you've got guys like this at a premium position, like pass rushers are, who in the offseason, there's 4 or 5 guys at the top of their game needing to be extended or re-signed or wanting more money, the sooner your team gets on making that deal with that player, the better that number is going to be. Because if a guy like Quinnen Williams with the Jets, for example, gets signed to a market-setting deal in the middle of March, and Jeffrey Simmons hasn't been signed by Rand Carthon yet, and he still wants a market-setting deal, he can say, well, guess what, Rand? You and I both agree I'm better than Quinnen Williams or whoever it may be that got the new deal. So that's the starting point, and I want to set the market. So it needs to be a couple, let's tack on $2 extra million a year to that. Let's tack on $15 extra million over the life of the contract to that. That's what you run into if you wait too long. And that's why if the Titans are smart, they should heed this warning from the Simmons camp. They should get on the same page and say, hey, let's get this done with so that we can know how much money we've got to spend. And this is important, by the way. Simmons is not the only scenario in which Simmons is not with the Titans, at least next season, at least for one more year, is if the Titans choose to trade him. And I think the only scenario in which they would even remotely consider moving Simmons is in a scenario in which they decide they want to move up for a quarterback in this draft. They move up to 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 5, and they go and get their quarterback. And instead of selling a bunch of future draft capital to the team they have to trade with, maybe they go and say, hey, we'll give you some draft capital. We'll swap firsts with you, throw in a 3rd or a 4th or a future 2nd or something like that. And we'll throw in a star player in the prime of his career, Jeffrey Simmons. You can debate whether or not that is worth it as a trade. But if they were to make the move to move on from Simmons, it would require, I think, a move for a quarterback. I don't see them making that move for any other player in this draft, and I really don't think they're inclined to want to do that either. I think they're inclined to want to pay him, and so that's what I would guess is going to happen. But unless they trade him, he's playing next year as a Titan. He's under contract next year, so that means he is for sure playing, and that means even if and when they sign him to his new contract this offseason, his cap number for this upcoming season is going to be the same, if not slightly lower, because he is under contract through this next year. His number is already set for what he's being paid next year. This new contract would just dictate how much he gets paid starting in the 2024 season and onward, and may actually drop his 2023 cap number by a couple million. They occasionally sometimes work it that way to give the team a little bit of extra flexibility.
And it would be really hard, I think, to trade Jeffrey Simmons in this market, because the 2 or 3 teams that are looking for maybe a guy on the front line or an edge or something like that, they at least I feel like they would rather bring in one of these top 3 guys in this draft and pay him on their rookie contract than have to give up a first early in the draft to trade for Jeffrey Simmons
Right.
and sign him to a whole big contract when they can save money with a guy who they might even value more than Jeffrey Simmons. So I think
That's a good point.
I think that's where they stand on that. I think it's a little bit more difficult than some Titans fans feel that he gets traded. I think it's a little harder to do than just sending him for a first like that. And as Rob says, Jeremy Fowler just said Carr is leaning Jets. So Tannehill might be on the look maybe to be traded during this time as well. We'll just have to see there. But I think it's a little hard to justify and as well to make a trade with Jeffrey Simmons.
No, I agree. And that's a good point. Other teams, in order for Simmons to be a trade piece and a potential move up for a quarterback, other teams would need to have interest in a guy who is a stud, is a top 3 player at his position in the league. One could argue definitely top 5, definitely in the prime of his career, entering the prime of his career, has everything you're looking for in a pass rusher and an interior run blocker. And yet he's going to dictate a ridiculous amount of money starting as soon as you were to trade for him, essentially in that 2024 season and on. You're not getting him for cheap. And there are some really good pass rushers in this draft that you would think a team considering that deal would say, we could get a guy that we don't know is Jeffrey Simmons. We know may never turn into Jeffrey Simmons, but they may be 80% of Jeffrey Simmons, and they are going to be
significantly
going to be 5% the cost, right? And that's something that teams will take into consideration. And it's yet another reason why I think teams are probably less likely to be interested in that at all, even if the Titans were to be interested, which I think there are. So there's a lot of hurdles to jump here. I know it's scary. Really, this wouldn't be scary for fans if it weren't for the recent lingering PTSD from the AJ Brown situation just this past season. Brown, as a second round pick, was a guy that, all of this came to a head a year earlier because he only had 4 years on his contract, didn't have a 5th year like Simmons does. So he was trying to get paid a year early as well, as many teams are doing with players these days. And that was something that, we thought, and I spoke about on this show as a thing that I did not think was going to happen. Nobody did. Then John Robinson makes the move, surprises everybody. So I was wrong, but so was everyone else. I don't think anybody saw that coming. Not even Mike Vrabel, one could argue. It's something that I don't think this team. I'll end this conversation with this, JT. And I said this the day that Rand Carthon was announced. I actually said it before they even announced the GM, but I said it the day Rand Carthon was announced as the Titans' new GM. Whoever the new guy who came in was, and it happens to be Rand Carthon, they're not a moron. They aren't going to look at what just happened with the Tennessee Titans organization, where they fire their GM mid-season, despite having a winning record over the life of his career, despite bringing this team to relevance over the past half decade and change, despite putting together a lot of really impressive pieces on the roster and overall making a lot of mistakes, but overcoming them with other moves that counteracted that, putting together a situation in which a team can win football games, and a lot of them, despite playing a pretty old school style of football, a pretty outlier style of football. He did all of those things, and yet in his 6th season with the team, John Robinson makes a disastrous trade, and he's fired before the end of that very season, the season in which he had just gotten a multiple-year contract extension with the coach that he hired, Mike Vrabel. So all of that in a vacuum. And what I'm trying to point out here is that while John Robinson didn't get fired exclusively for trading away A.J. Brown, from a narrative standpoint, and if you're looking at the biggest mistakes he made most recently, that's at the top of the list, it sure looks like, and people sure seem to think, I think John Robinson got fired for trading away A.J. Brown, or it sure didn't help. That may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. So no new GM, Rand Carthon included, is going to come in, see that guy on the way out the door who he's replacing, see the number one thing people attribute his firing to, and say, I'm going to do that exact same thing as my first order of business as GM with the other star player we got in that exact same draft, the guy we drafted in the round before A.J. Brown, Jeffrey Simmons, the guy who is the cornerstone player on the defense of this team. I'm going to ship him off as my first order of business and really make this fan base, and really endear this fan base to me as a GM. It's not happening. It's not, even if in hindsight, 5 years from now, Rand Carthon's 5-year, $140 million deal with Jeffrey Simmons looks like a disaster because Jeffrey Simmons had 2 season-ending injuries and really dropped off after his 3rd year or whatever it may be. It will still have been worth it in the grand calculus of his career and his decision-making because the spot that he's in with this guy's contract, it is a must pay. You got to pay him whatever the number is required to keep him, and I think that they will. So I didn't think Brown was going to get traded. I was wrong. I don't take that. I take that into consideration when I'm evaluating this situation. And despite that, I still am very confident. There's nothing, at least as of now, to indicate there's any way Jeffrey Simmons is leaving unless they were to fall in love with one of these quarterbacks. That's the only scenario I could see it happening. So with that, and Kenneth Krall comments here on the YouTube page, which you can do as well over at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube. The main problem with not trading up for a quarterback this particular year is weirdly Ran Carthon is going to make this team better, which means the Titans will have a worse draft slot next year. Kenneth, it's a good point. And something we've talked about before, the idea that if you are in the camp that thinks drafting a quarterback this year is the correct move for the Titans, probably the strongest element of your argument is, will Ran Carthon ever have this high of a first-round draft pick to work with? Now, obviously, you don't have to have the 11th pick to move up. You can have the 32nd pick and move up, but it costs you a whole heck of a lot more to do that. So it's arguably the easiest this year it's ever going to be. We won't go into a full 30 conversation about that, Kenneth, but I can guarantee you just keep listening to the show over the next month and we'll talk about that very topic a number of times with a number of guests. But the long and short of that answer, in my opinion, and if you disagree, feel free to chime in. It would require giving away assets that you need in order to make this team good enough to justify bringing in that new quarterback. I think that going and getting your quarterback this year would be very much a Chicago Bears Justin Fields situation. You go get a guy who looks like he could be the future of your franchise, and yet through 2 seasons, their development was stunted, and they haven't been able to carry the team on their back, and you've wasted 2 years of their rookie contract money because you weren't prepared with the team around them to be even remotely successful. With a guy who, rookie quarterbacks, even the best. Trevor Lawrence is a great example. Generational talent coming out. Great prospect. His first year with a horrible coach, which the Titans don't have, and a very bad roster, he can't overcome it. He's still a rookie quarterback in the NFL. And then in year 2, you get a good coach and you get a lot of roster upgrades, and suddenly he looks like the guy you expected him to be. That's the perfect dichotomy of, I think, looking through the looking glass, the canary in the coal mine of this is what you might get if you're the Titans and go up and get a quarterback this year, because who else is going to be around them to play? Who's going to be protecting them on the offensive line? And then maybe that's the segue for our line.
All I was going to say is that I don't think if the Titans were to move up, they're not going to use Jeffrey Simmons as big of a piece as an 11th or first round pick next year. I think that is more enticing capital than a Jeffrey Simmons. And also, I know we're 1 day removed from QB drills, and I know the hype is big, but let's not forget that also for the past 3 months or so, we've had rumblings of, hey, the QB class next year for the 24 draft might even be better than this one. So
yeah,
let's talk about
let's move on. I just want to acknowledge Jacob saying with the comment about how you could use all of these same arguments for Brown a year ago as we're using for Simmons. And Jacob, I'm acknowledging I used a lot of these same arguments for Brown, and Kenneth Krall with the devil's advocate argument that Joe Burrow overcame in his first year, and Lawrence had Urban Meyer, who I'm assuming he's insinuating is one of the worst, if not the worst coaches in NFL history. Both good points.
Wouldn't be wrong.
Fellas. We do have to move on because we have a lot of other combine-related things to talk about today, but make sure to be with us and tune in the next week or so or two, and we're going to have this exact conversation in long form with some guests that we may even go live for and talk with you all, because I can tell it's something that we enjoy talking about.
If an unfollowing of Instagram is warranting this conversation, I can't wait for the rest of the offseason.
It's just going to get hotter and hotter. So appreciate y'all's comments. We're gonna table those, but we will get back to them in a couple of episodes. Today, we're gonna focus on what was supposed to be the topic of today's show, and now we're almost 30 minutes in and have barely even mentioned it. We need to talk about these linemen who ran today, did their testing. We've got a lot of opinions on that, and then the running backs. I want to call an audible here, JT, because we plan on
Okay.
starting with the linemen and going to the running backs, but we've really only got 3 guys in the running back group that we want to talk about.
True.
So maybe we just get those out of the way.
Round at
and
the
then
end, anyways.
Yeah. I didn't want to end on a running back lightning round and feel like we disrespected the running back position. So we'll talk about the 3 guys that stood out most to us at running back, and then get into the meat of today, which is these linemen. And that's, the position of need for the Titans really for the last 2 seasons or more that has been the most important for them to address, and they now desperately need to address more than ever, because they may have a line that needs 4 new players. At the very least, you'd think 2, probably 3 new guys. The good news is there's a lot of really good, talented linemen in this draft, a lot of good guys with really versatile skill sets and abilities and play styles. And so the pickings are not slim. The pickings are good this year if you need a lineman. The Titans absolutely do. However, when you zoom in, you realize the 11th overall pick, while it might be advantageous this year to have the 11th pick and need a tackle, because as we look through the top 10 and the needs of a lot of these teams and the overall ranking of a lot of these players in this draft, it seems like the Titans are probably, and my opinion has changed on this, JT, really this week. I thought there was a good chance Paris Johnson Jr. wouldn't be available by 11. And we had this conversation with our guest, Nick Suss, yesterday, who was fantastic. So go watch that episode after this one, because he's great over at the Tennessean. We went through with Nick one by one before we recorded yesterday, each team in the top 10, addressing their needs, trying to figure out where they may go, what they are probably going to be targeting position-wise. It seems like the Titans might have their pick of the litter at 11, and I'd be really surprised if they didn't have their pick of Skoronski or Johnson. If Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State and Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern are both gone by 11, as well as the top 4 quarterbacks as well, which would be 6 players. And then you got the
Jalen Carter,
Bryce,
Tyree Wilson.
Yep, Wilson and Anderson.
One of the
that
corners.
Makes 10. You've got 3 corners in this draft that could all go top 10. You're up to 13. Like, the math doesn't work out. So either there's going to be, maybe there's one of those 3 defenders available for the Titans because both linemen are gone. And maybe there's the best, you could have cornerback 1 in the draft. You could have Christian Gonzalez at 11 if both of those tackles are gone. So I guess the good news is if somehow both of the top tackle prospects are gone at 11, that means there has to be a top flight defender, cornerback, or quarterback available at 11, which a lot of fans probably wouldn't be happy about. But I don't know. As draft nerds, you and I, if the Titans came away with Will Anderson at 11,
or Christian Gonzalez,
or 11 comes around and one of those guys is available, and a team that desperately needs one of those positions and it wants to take advantage of the opportunity of an overall number 1 pick potential guy being available at 11, say the Chiefs decide to trade on up there and the Titans get a haul at 11 that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten because of who's available there. Like the scenarios for the draft for the Titans all look very enticing if they play their cards right.
I think so. And as Jacob said here, it'd be fascinating if all the offensive linemen were available at 11, because then they would get some great insight into Carthen's mindset and priorities. And I know we were going to talk about the running backs, but that was just like almost a perfect segue. We might as well just jump into these linemen here.
All right. Well, we'll change our minds once again. Might as well.
If we're already so deep into
we're
this
going to get
conversation.
to both of them anyway. Yeah. So let's talk about them.
But one is clearly and more obviously important to the Titans' needs than the other.
This is true.
So yes, we saw both Peter Skoronski and Paris Johnson Jr. today. And it would be very interesting from a Rand Carthen perspective here, which one they would go with if they were both available. Obviously, it depends who you ask in terms of which one rates higher. But we got more insight today on the situation with Peter Skoronski becoming a tackle or not, with his weigh-in and his measurements. But also just looking at the two from a talent and athlete perspective, like on the field, I think Paris Johnson Jr. is far and away the best offensive lineman or tackle in this draft.
Well, let me parse what you said, and maybe you agree. You may think what you just said, and that's fine. I disagree with it, but I have a feeling you may actually mean what I'm about to say. Paris Johnson Jr., from watching them today, he is the best. He is the best mover athletically.
Yeah,
of
more
this
so
group.
probably that.
And if your point is that you think Skronsky is a guard more than a tackle,
I think so.
then
Yeah.
making Parrish your number one tackle, I think, is totally fair. I think if I'm ranking the overall lineman talent, excluding in my mind the positional value, which is really what comes into play here. Obviously, tackles from a positional value standpoint, very, very much more valuable than interior offensive linemen. But if you take that out of the equation, Skronsky is the most talented player in the offensive line class. And then it for me goes to Paris Johnson Jr. and then the rest. However, and I was surprised by this because I do from the tape think that Skronsky's more talented a football player than Johnson is. Watching them both on the field today, Johnson's ability to move, his burst, his explosiveness as an athlete, the fluidity, the buttery smooth movement he's got out there that he somehow manages to, it's very float like a butterfly, sting like a bee with him in the sense that, which is cliche, I know, but the way that he's able to move with so much more. I mean, just watching every single fan in that stadium today, folks that have never watched football in their lives, were looking at the field and they could tell, I guarantee you, hey, that guy, whoever the Ohio State tackle is, that Paris Johnson guy, he's the most talented, most gifted mover out here. He's the most athletic guy. His ability to be really ferocious and terrifying with the way that he moves, I guess just urgency is the word I'm looking for. The urgency and violence.
I mean, explosive on every single movement he made today.
And yet his ability to cut, change direction, move forwards, backwards, up and down the field. A lot of these guys, these linemen are huge athletes. As talented as they are, for many of them, it's very plodding. Their back pedal or their shuffle step is a little bit choppy. It's not all that smooth, especially when you compare it to all the other athletes at other positions that we've watched today that are more skilled in that way. That's more their type of game. With these linemen, Johnson really stood out in his ability to both have the most explosive straight line speed and movement ability, and also his change of direction. It's effortless. He's not off balance. He's not struggling with stepping over 2 left feet, which again, you'd think it's not that big a deal, but you watch these guys and there's, a lot of guys from really small schools, some of the HBCU products that didn't play against higher level competition or maybe a little bit undersized. A lot of the guys that play interior line positions and don't have to be as talented athletically as the tackle prospects. It is noticeably more plodding and kind of clunky at times. And some of them, are meant to be big body run stuffers and just an immovable object in the interior of the offensive line. That was kind of our takeaway. And we're not going to talk about him in depth, but just to give him a shout out, O'Cyrus Torrence out of Florida. That was what we were talking about watching him was, man, the movement's not great, but as an interior guard, you're not going to want him to be your big pulling guard all the time. That ability to move, he's not Aaron Brewer. He's really the opposite of Aaron Brewer. But what he is going to be able to do with that big body, that frame, that strength that he has playing on the inside, he's going to be that immovable object in the run game. And you're not going to be able to get around him very easily at all just because of his pure size and strength on the inside in the pass rush. So that was kind of the gist. And with a guy like Paris Johnson Jr., to contrast him with a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence from a movement standpoint was so night and day.
Yeah, especially, really anybody else in that first half
group of
guys. And there's some really good guys, some first round kind of caliber guys. Paris Johnson Jr. was just right above everyone else. He was a step above, in my opinion. And so if you're looking at it,
and I've got his measurements here, by the way. Let's give his official measurements as of this afternoon. Monster athlete physically. The traits are all there. 6'6", 313 pounds, 36 1/8 arm length. Just for reference, by the way, the benchmark for tackle arm length, the number you're looking for to be to have the necessary reach to play tackle in the NFL for the most part. And this is something we're going to talk about a lot with Skronsky here in a minute, because he, spoiler, didn't quite meet that 34-inch arm length benchmark. With Johnson, he's got it covered by over 2 full inches, a 36 1/8 arm length. Just for reference, I'll pull it up here in a second when JT's talking, but that's got to be a top 90 plus percentile arm length. and then a 9.5-inch arm size. He's a stud. He's fantastic.
And we're going to talk about these. S-Rob says if there's a huge discrepancy between Paris Johnson Jr. and guys like Darnell Wright or Broderick Jones, they're all first round caliber guys. I would say personally, in my evaluation, and as athletes wise, and how they completed the drills today in that section of it, I think Paris Johnson Jr. was number one. If I had to give a number two, I'm going with Broderick Jones on that. I think he wasn't as fast and maybe was like maybe a step behind Paris Johnson Jr. in those drills, but still an absolute athlete. I wouldn't be mad with him on any team. I think he's a starting caliber offensive tackle in the NFL.
He's a top 5 tackle in this class. By the way, that percentile for arm length, 36 and an eighth for tackles, is 96th percentile on Mock Draftable's database, which goes back to 1999. So a ridiculous arm length.
And that's the huge discrepancy between these top two quote unquote tackles in this draft.
Right.
Here.
And so let's transition into a conversation with Skoronski. And again, if you would like to get in on the conversation, head over to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. The comment section on the live video there is where you can get comments in, and we'll be able to see them on the show and throw them up there and chat with you. And we'd love to chat with you. So please come on down, leave your comments. Also, retweet, like, share, do all those good things so we can get as many people in here as possible to join the conversation. Now, Peter Skoronski is a guy we talked about at length yesterday. We're going to talk about him today as well. Got to see him tested quite well. The big contention with him is his arm length. We were expecting shorter than 34-inch arms for Skoronski. He ended up coming in with, and I'll get the official one here, but I believe it's 32
and a third.
No, I think it's 32 and a fourth. He came in with.
There's a lot of guys.
There's a lot of people.
Shout out to the Draft Network though for putting all of these into a thread here. For
absolutely. Here we go.
Yeah.
I got it. It's 32 and a fourth inch arm. So his official measurement, 6'4", fine, 313 pounds, cool. Arm length 32 and a fourth, and then hand size 10 inches, which is nice. But for tackles, hand length, hand size is not the number one thing. Can I real quick give some context? We were sitting in the stands at Lucas Oil Stadium, and I was doing some research on arm length historically for guys, because you always hear, right, 34 inches. That's the mainstream benchmark for tackle arm length. There are tackles that have succeeded in the NFL with sub 34-inch arms. It's hard to explain. It's like it's a requirement, but it's got a big fat asterisk, and the asterisk is only required unless you're a freak and you're an outlier. Like I guess what I mean is it's required for 99% of guys, but it is not a hard and fast rule. It's like the English language. There's always an exception to the rule. So we're not saying Skoronski can't be a guy who can play tackle in the NFL. In fact, a lot of people we respect, who we were talking about yesterday, think he should be given a chance to play tackle in the NFL, like Dan Brugler over at The Athletic. You look at his tape and it says the same thing, right? Every single NFL caliber edge rusher that he went up against in college as a tackle, he wasn't having trouble with them. His arm length wasn't an issue. He shut them all down. And so you look at that, and if you're a tape guy, not a traits guy, you go, what are we even talking about here, right? He went up against a lot of really talented Big Ten edge rushers, the Aiden Hutchinsons of the world, and it wasn't a problem. Why are we talking about this? Well, here's why we're talking about this. I went through on Mock Draftable's database of tackles coming out as tackles. They played tackle in college. They may have been in the draft. For many of these guys, I'm sure it was public information that they were not going to play tackle at the next level, but that's what they came out with experience at, and a number of them got moved in the NFL. But I wanted to see, of all of the guys with the same arm length or shorter that came out as tackles since 1999, again, in the Mock Draftable database, what was the success rate with those guys? What did they go on to do? Do I recognize any of the names? And so I got every guy, of which there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 since 1999 tackles that came out with 32 and a fourth or shorter arms. And here's the record for these guys, okay? Tony Bergstrom went in the third round, was immediately made an interior offensive lineman, backup practice squad guy. Justin Pugh in 2013, played tackle for 2 years, didn't play very well at all, I believe, with the Giants. Moved to interior offensive line, has been a career starter. Matt Filer in 2014, undrafted free agent, played tackle and interior as a practice squad guy. Brett Boyko in 2015, undrafted free agent, interior in the CFL and XFL. Eric Austell in 2017, 32-inch arms, undrafted free agent, interior offensive lineman, bouncing around practice squads. Nick Gates, undrafted free agent in 2018 with 32-inch arms, interior guy as a starter and a backup, bouncing around the league. Andre James in 2019, 32-inch arms, undrafted, interior guy in the league, starter and a backup player. Breno Giacomini in 2008 is kind of the outlier here, and I'm probably going to write an article on this offseason, so I'll go into detail after I do a little bit more diving into these guys' careers. But Breno Giacomini in 2008 with 32 and an eighth-inch arms went in the 5th round and was a journeyman starter at tackle in the NFL. So he is one of those guys that I think was a slight exception to the rule. Now, was he a great tackle? No, he kept bouncing around. If you're a great tackle, you don't play for 5 different teams throughout your career. You at least play a large chunk with one team, and I don't think he did more than one contract with each team, if I'm remembering correctly. Then you got John Cullen in 2012, 32 and an eighth-inch arms, undrafted, played tackle, but he's not even in the league. Never started a game. Ross Pierschbacher in 2019, 32 and an eighth-inch arms, 5th rounder, interior guy on practice squads. Rick Leonard, 32 and a 4th-inch arms in 2018, 4th rounder, plays tackle, but on practice squads. And then Brady Christensen in 2021, really too early to know, but 32 and a 4th-inch arms, drafted in the 3rd round. They immediately moved him to the interior offensive line, and he is a starter and a backup in the league. So track record of guys with that arm length or shorter in the last 24 seasons. There is maybe one guy that was a starter caliber player, and even he is somebody that you've not heard of probably in Breno Giacomini, and he's also bounced around the league, so he couldn't have been that talented of a tackle. Just for reference, by the way, I went ahead and pulled the names of every guy since 1999 that came out as a tackle with 33 or shorter inch arms, shorter than 33-inch arms. So the highest being 32 and 7/8 inches. I haven't dug into their backgrounds yet, but let me just read the list of names. You let me know if you've heard of any of these guys and they still play tackle. Liam Eichenberg, Taylor Dever, Jackson Carman, yes. Alaric Jackson, Garrett Gilkey, Alex Kappa, yes, but he was moved to the inside, I know. Jalen Mayfield, Brendan James, Dustin Waldron, Jordan Devey, Sean Hickey, Austin Shepard, Will Freeze or Fries, and Caleb McGarry. Not Murderers Row.
I think the best one on there is probably Alex Kappa as far as career, but like I said, I don't know if any of those other guys are still playing tackle. But
to be fair, actually, a lot of these guys were in the last 2 or 3 years, gotcha. So we don't
exactly know.
It's not to say that they are all busts, but I am going to eventually write an article on this. I'm going to dive into the background of these guys and probably talk to some folks that know a lot more about offensive line than I do. But needless to say, it sure seems like it is. There's a long laundry list of historical data that is up against Skoronski, and we don't know. There's a chance that, I'll say this: every outlier is the first at some point. There has to be a first guy to be an outlier and break the norm. There will eventually be a guy who plays tackle in the NFL with sub 33-inch arms and is a stud. Maybe it's Peter Skoronski. We don't know. The tape indicates he might be. He's the closest to a guy like that I think we've seen in years. But the hill he has to climb is a tall one. And even if he can hang at tackle, even if he can hang and he's a top 20 tackle in the league, the team he plays for may end up deciding, okay, you're a mediocre to slightly worse than mediocre tackle, but we think you could be a $20 million top 3 player guard in the league. We're going to go get a tackle in free agency or draft one next year after your first season struggling at tackle. We'll bump you inside and you'll become the latest star guard in the NFL. Like, that's always going to be a temptation for these teams unless he is immediately in year one an above average starter, which I just don't think that he will be.
I think, to finish off Peter Skoronski here real quick, one thing when you're talking about outliers is that if you go through your list, and you can tell me if you're wrong about this, I don't think I heard anybody drafted higher than the third round on
Correct.
that list.
Third round. No, there was one. The guy who ended up being a journeyman starter, I believe, went in the first round. Yeah, no, excuse me. Justin Pugh in 2013, drafted 19th overall in the first round. And he's the guy with the Giants who played 2 years at tackle and did that exact thing that I just described. 2 years at tackle. Wasn't a disaster. Wasn't a train wreck. I think he actually got some nods in his rookie year for the all-rookie team, which all rookie tackles typically are still bad tackles, at very best mediocre tackles. So that shouldn't throw you off. And then his second year struggled to the point that they went and I think in free agency signed a guy who was a tackle, moved him inside, and he's been a starter for them for years. I don't know if he's still playing, but for years he was a starter at guard for the Giants and was a really good one. That's exactly what could happen to Skoronski.
It could, but I was going to say, even to that point, he's drafted at 19. Peter Skoronski is on a big board, a top 10 player, and should be drafted like so in this draft. So if there is someone who can do it, I think it is him. He's one of the best offensive lineman prospects that we have seen in a long time. But it's going to be very interesting to see what the Titans do there, what they value. If they value, hey, maybe we can take Skoronski because we think he's a better player, and find a guy left tackle in free agency, and then kind of build our line from there, kind of re-upping at guard there to have one of the top three guys. But bottom line for me coming away from this weekend is that if I'm the Titans and they're both there, I'm taking Paris Johnson Jr.
I think that's where I'm leaning as well. But again, I really want to do some more study on this. I want to hear from some more folks, because just this week, hearing firsthand, overhearing a guy like Greg Cosell saying, I would not spend the 11th pick on a guy like Paris Johnson Jr.
You might know a little bit more than me, but
I know he knows a little bit more than us because he's been doing it for about as long as we've been alive. So there is conflicting opinion on that, and I want to look into it. But from a combine standpoint, we'll put a button on it with this. He showed us everything he needed to show at the combine this week to dictate being the number one tackle in this draft. He was really impressive this week. And if he's not worth the 11th pick, I think that there's no doubt he is a first round caliber player, and
for sure
he will
top
be going
15.
He will be going in the top 15 unless something dramatic happens. Let's move on, and we can actually address a question here from S-Rob, still hanging out with us in the chat. You can join him over at the Broadway Sports Media YouTube page and chat with us with the live video there. He asks, is there a huge discrepancy between Paris Johnson Jr. and Darnell Wright and Broderick Jones? Great question. One that we're going to dive into a lot over the coming weeks. But I'll say from today's perspective, yes. You mentioned Broderick Jones. Another guy that I kind of lump into that next tier of guys is DeJuan Jones. And it was a cool comparison today because, they do these drills alphabetically. They run them in the order that, here we go, offensive tackle 1, offensive tackle 2, and they're listed tackle numbers by alphabet seating chart. So we got to see Paris Johnson Jr. followed by Broderick Jones, followed by DeJuan Jones, all right after each other as the three final guys in the first group of linemen. So we got to see direct comparisons one after the other. And from a movement standpoint, they are all three extremely different players. Paris Johnson, like we said, is the guy with the explosiveness. He's got the crazy movement skills for a guy of his size. With Broderick, it's a guy that's slightly smaller. I believe he comes in at an inch shorter, a couple of pounds lighter. I'll double check that here in a second. But right. Okay. So right here, the direct comparison, Paris Johnson, 6'6", Jones, 6'5". Johnson has 2 pounds on Broderick Jones, has an inch and a half on Jones. Jones's arms came in at 34 3/4. Great arm length for a tackle. He's not the outlier that Johnson is, but again, that 34 number is really, it's not the longer the arms, the better tackle prospect you are. It's really just a threshold. This number or higher, then you're going to pass fail, right? It's pass fail. And then he's got monster hands, 10 and 5/8 inch hands. Again, doesn't mean a whole lot, but crazy measurements for a crazy athlete. I believe he ran a slightly faster 40-yard dash. I think he may have.
Between Paris and Broderick, Paris did not run the 40. So.
Yes, excuse me. I guess I forgot that Paris didn't run. I say that because didn't Broderick hold the record today in this? I think he was the fastest
at least
guy.
In the first
in the first group. I know that he was one of the only guys that was sub 5, right? 4.98 or something along those lines. And so he's got a little bit more top end speed. The movement was clunkier to me. And again, we got to see them back and forth, not nearly as smooth of a mover. Didn't seem nearly as violent of a mover. He seemed, he and this is all relative, right? Because those three guys were like, it was the JV squad numbers 1 through 23. And then those three guys, 24, 25, and 26. It was a different breed. So all three guys I'm quite high on. I think they all should go in the first or second round. But DeWand, I was probably the least impressed of the three. And with Broderick, you want some numbers. Let me give you some numbers. With DeWand, if you want some numbers, I'll give you some numbers. DeWand is the most impressive physical specimen in the city of Indianapolis right now, I wager to say. I don't think that there is a single soul within a 50-mile radius of where we are sitting that is a more impressive physical specimen. Here's some quick stats for you. DeWand Jones today came in at 6'8", 374 pounds, 374. That's 26 pounds away from 400. I didn't say 274, 374. 36 3/8 inch arms. He's got even Paris Johnson's ridiculously long arms beat by a couple of eighths of an inch. And then 11 5/8 inch hands. He's a behemoth. Yeah. He's a house.
If you want violence in your tackle game,
sure,
you want DeWand Jones. In the one drill where they're using the blue,
the guy with the bag, the guy holding the bag. We were scared for that guy's life when DeWand Jones
he almost put one on his butt.
He did. He almost picked a guy up and threw him. We were joking about
the first time he went easy on him, and then the next drill where there was two of them, he pushes off the guy and he almost falls on his back. Because
I turn to you and say they should make the guy holding the bag a former lineman in the NFL, because if you got a guy like me holding that bag, every person is going to throw them.
Yeah.
And that's what DeWand Jones was trying to do a handful of times. He probably wasn't really even trying. I think that he's just that big and that physical. He's a guy that is less talented. And, we got to see those two, Paris Johnson Jr. and DeWand Jones, play opposite each other. They were the bookend tackles with Ohio State last year. Total side note, Ohio State, small reload this year, just losing their starting left tackle, right tackle, center, starting quarterback, who will be a top 5 pick, and one of their best receivers in JSN. It's, I guess, just going to be, I'm not up on Ohio State. I don't know who's in the pipeline, but all I know is Marvin Harrison Jr. better have some folks to play around him next year, or else he's going to have to carry. With DeWand, did you have any other mental notes on him, or do we want to talk about him as a prospect a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, for his size, he still moved very, very well.
Ridiculously well.
Well. I'm not sure of his actual PFF grades, but if I had to imagine, if you're looking for a right tackle who's going to be excellent in run block, on that outside there, he is your guy in this draft for sure.
I want to see his 40 time. That's what I'm looking up here.
He ran probably one of the slower 40 times of the day.
5.36, but he's almost 400 pounds.
He's almost 400
so
pounds.
So a 5.36 for him.
And when I said he was still quick out there, I meant more of just like his movements, especially in a couple of those drills, kind of being the lead blocker and getting to the outside on some of those drills. He still was up there with those guys and impressed me a lot.
Well, here's the best way to explain it, I think. Was he the mover that Paris Johnson Jr. was? No. Was he as smooth or as fast? No. Was he as violent? Yes. And considering the fact that he has 2 inches and over 50 pounds on Paris, actually over 60 pounds on Paris Johnson, he looked like he fit in from an eye test, just watching, evaluating movement ability, explosion, speed, smoothness, all of those things. The eye test dictated, to me at least, that you look at DeWand Jones and every other lineman in that group that went today that was 100 pounds lighter and 6 inches shorter, he looked like he moved as well as those guys that were 100 pounds lighter and 6 inches shorter. So while he wasn't Paris Johnson, at his size and as a very different player, as a guy that, again, you're not going to want to pull a lot with him. You're not going to want, he may not be the best matchup against a real pure speed edge rusher, but in every other circumstance, he's a mountain and an really an immovable object, a guy that you're going to have a hard time getting around. You're certainly not going through him if you're an edge rusher. So I think that it is a styles makes fights kind of thing. What are you looking for as a team drafting a tackle? Obviously, we think Paris Johnson is the more talented, more complete prospect, but I think both could absolutely be great offensive linemen in the NFL, and I expect both to go probably in the first round.
I do too. I think that kind of separated the first rounders from the second rounders there.
Mm-hmm.
But this class isn't probably as deep as, say, like a running back, tight end, or cornerback. But
and it never is. I mean, tackles are so hard to come by. There's a reason it's a premium position.
It's some day two guys that we saw today could also be up there as a tiny
note before we move. I know we're trying to transition, but I saw this note in terms of measuring these tackles' arm lengths. We talked about Paris Johnson and DeJuan both having crazy impressive arm lengths. For Paris Johnson Jr. at 36 1/8 inch arms, only 8 tackles in the mock draftable database going back to 1999 were longer, and only 1 wingspan is longer. But that 8 longer arms metric was broken seconds later, or changed seconds later by DeJuan Jones. There are now 9 guys in the database with longer arms. DeJuan Jones, I believe, now has the longest arms of any guy in the database. I'll double check that. Let's see. 36 3/4 is the longest. So actually, no, he is tied for the 4th longest arms in the history of the combine since 1999. So ridiculous numbers. But who's the next guy we want to talk about?
Let's talk about some day 2 guys here who, if there was a scenario in which the Titans may look to go in a different position, there might be a couple,
double up at tackle.
Double up at tackle.
Not off the board.
Not a terrible idea either. There are some guys who we saw today that I was pretty impressed with. Let's start with the guy out of Syracuse here in Matthew Bergeron. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name.
Bergeron, yep.
He was also a guy in that first round that if there was a guy out of the JV squad or so.
And we say that relatively. They're all tackles.
Really
they're talented NFL prospects.
But there was just an it factor or a quickness difference in a lot of these guys.
Right.
And I think one guy who potentially could be make his way into that upper group with maybe with the right coach and the right team and the right fit.
Maybe in that late first round tier of guys.
It's Bergeron. He's currently on the consensus board here, 68th overall, but I could see him going in that late second round, early first round.
He's tackle 8 on the consensus board, but I would have him higher just anecdotally. I haven't finished my tackle study. I'd say he's higher on my list slightly. But were there any thoughts you had from seeing him move today? I mean, generally I was impressed.
I thought he was pretty fluid
testing.
for his testing. I'd have to go watch more tape on him. He's not one of those guys that I've watched a lot of tape on, but from the drills today, I thought he was probably in that top 6, top 7 guys today.
Yeah,
for sure.
I agree.
One other guy that I had here real quick. Then we have a couple people in the chat here giving some guys that maybe we saw today. Blake Freeland is also a guy that may be in that 3rd round. I thought he was one of the faster offensive linemen today, especially in the 40. I thought he also tested pretty well. He could be another good option for the Titans if they choose to look at him maybe in the late 3rd, early 4th. Yeah,
and just to not ignore the chat here, which we'd love for you to participate in. Once again, you can do that over at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. Find this live video, and we'd love to chat with you about your thoughts about anything Titans in the draft and the combine. Jacob seems to have taken it upon himself to do a little bit of research on those guys that have sub 33-inch arms and are tackles in the NFL. And I love that we can follow the train of thought here from Jacob. Liam Eichenberg, who I mentioned, he went and found was a round 2 pick. It's the 10th pick in the 2nd round, was a tackle for the Dolphins in 2021. And then he realized very shortly after, that Liam is now a guard. So that is just once again proving our point. Jacob asking about Tyler Steen. Didn't notice him. He's on my short list of guys to pay attention to. I mentioned it before we went out there today.
Yeah, you mentioned him a little bit more than me. I wasn't a guy I was super paying attention to today.
So much so that I'm not actually positive. Was he even testing out there today?
I believe so.
I thought that he was, but if that doesn't give you an accurate representation, an honest representation of how impressive he was today, our attention was so not captured by by Tyler Steen, who I know had a very impressive Senior Bowl. I remember talking to our buddy Zach Lyons and Stoney Keeley about how they were impressed with him at the Senior Bowl. And I expected him to be impressive today. He was so unimpressive and unremarkable that I'm not even positive he was there. Maybe there's a reality in which he was so unremarkable today because he wasn't there.
Mostly,
I'm not sure.
It seems because he did the vertical jump, he did the broad jump, and that was basically it today.
Okay. So yeah, we didn't get to see him run. We didn't get to see any drills.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Jacob, Tyler Steen, no thoughts from the combine. However, he is a guy that is on my short list of folks to look into for the next coming weeks. And we get into, eventually we'll be doing a top either 5 or 10 list episode going through the top 5 or 10 guys at each position. So that's something to look forward to there. The next guy, which you were starting to talk about, I think, were you talking about the BYU guy?
Yeah, Blake Freeland.
Yeah, Blake Freeland really stood out. We were talking with another member of the media here in the stands who I guess was more familiar with Freeland than we were, because he was not a guy that I had written down coming into the day to pay attention to, but he did catch my attention just watching the testing. He is, from a physical specimen standpoint, another guy, very different from any of the guys we've talked about, very different. Physically, he immediately looks different than the other guys. Smaller legs, a little bit more, not heavy set up top, but he's got he's bigger up top, smaller down low than a lot of these guys. And he is crazy tall. I think he's in that 6'7", 6'8" range as well.
Yeah, and why we noticed him is because he had an insane testing day today.
Yes.
His vertical jump was 37, which is the highest ever.
You have this test pulled up here?
Yeah, I got his test. I don't have his measurements.
Okay, I'll pull up the measurements.
His vertical jump today, 37, highest ever by an offensive lineman. His broad jump was a clean 10 flat, first in that category today.
Wow.
40-yard dash, 4.98, second only behind Broderick Jones. And his 10-yard split was 1.68 seconds, which is better than Broderick Jones. So he's a fast dude out there. I thought he was very impressive, not just in those tests, but also in some of the drills. He was one of those guys in the first group that also I had my eye on.
Yeah, let me see here. Blake Freeland, gonna find him eventually. I know this. Here we go. Good radio. Blake Freeland with another 6'8" guy, again, just so tall, and his ability to move at that height was also very impressive to us. 392 pounds, even heavier than DeJuan Jones, which, just seeing this now for the first time, kind of surprises me. He didn't look that much bigger than DeJuan. He's just got a different body composition. It's a different build. Arm length 33 7/8, mildly concerning. He is coming out as a tackle, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So as a tackle, slightly below the threshold, but that's one of those where I'd imagine if a team is in love with everything about him, that won't be the thing that keeps them from pulling the trigger on him. And 10-inch hands. Now on the consensus board, do we know where he is?
Currently ranked 94.
Right. So he's right behind Bergeron, projected to be a day 2, round 3 guy. I guess that makes him tackle 9 on the big board, but his stock is rising, it looks like. For reference, by the way, Tyler Steen is kind of right behind him. So that is that tier 3. Here's, in my mind, from a tackle perspective, here's how I have them tiered right now.
Yeah.
It's Paris Johnson and Skoronski, if we're talking about Skoronski as a tackle. And then it is a second tier, fringe first round, at the latest late second round guys. Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, I'm not crazy about him, but people think he's there. DeJuan Jones, Darnell Wright. And then this third group is, and this is another guy I'm not crazy about, but I've not watched a ton of him, so I'll hold my judgment. Jalen Duncan out of Maryland in that third group with Matthew Bergeron, Blake Freeland, and Tyler Steen.
There was one guy
all in that second tier there.
Pretty disappointed with today, or just didn't wow me. Anton Harrison was that guy.
Yeah,
another guy who also has already has shorter arms, and I believe he was also around that 32-inch arm, maybe 33.
I'll pull it up.
Getting up there.
So he 31 3/4 inch arm. So he is in the short arm category with Peter Skoronski.
Didn't really impress me today.
Not super impressive. Another guy that, and here's really, if you want a very basic, but I think relatively comprehensive comparison, Anton Harrison is, from a physical standpoint, he's Peter Skoronski, but not a stud on tape.
Yeah.
Not that he's a stud. He's not that dude on tape.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the things that Skoronski has, things about him as a player that even with those crazy short arms and a very important metric for the position, you still have to think about it. You just have to, because the tape is there and it does not lie. With Harrison, he is, I think, welcome to the NFL. You're going to be a fantastic guard.
Yeah, I think so too. Shall we I know we said we weren't going to do this, but let's do a running back lightning round.
All right. Any other thoughts on, I'm trying to think.
Not really.
Let me peruse my notes real quick to make sure there's
Blake
nothing else
Freeland,
from the tackles here.
Last thing about Blake Freeland is his vertical was better than guys like A.J. Brown.
Oh, yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper. Like, all those guys had worse, and not worse, but like objectively
they were
worse,
shorter verticals than
Blake Freeland.
Now it helps that he gets to start 17 feet in the air because he's 6'8", but a 37-inch vertical jump from him today, the best recorded ever by a lineman at the combine. So that one was impressive. And that's about all the notes. Oh, I had a couple of comps that Daniel Jeremiah at Move the Sticks on Twitter. He's a Mount Rushmore spring NFL guy. This time of year, he is in that class of guys that you have to top 5 pay attention to. Knows what he's doing, obviously. Has been here all week, and he has folks working for him as a team, constantly pulling these comparisons together, and they do a great job. Elijah Vera Tucker is the guy that he had comped to Peter Skoronski. If you look at their measurements that I have here, usually we'd show you this kind of thing on the show, but didn't have this pulled in advance. Both around 6'4". Vera Tucker is a half-inch taller, roughly the same weight, 308 to 313. Arm length, Elijah Vera Tucker, slightly shorter, 32 1/8 inch arms to Skoronski's 32 1/4. 40-yard dash, 5'10" versus 5'16". Vertical, roughly the same. Skoronski's actually got him by 2.5 inches. Broad jump, Skoronski's got him by almost a full foot. So that is a comp of a guy in Vera Tucker who's got a very nice NFL career. This is an embarrassing question, but it's honest, so I'll ask: is Vera Tucker a tackle?
That's a great question.
I think I know the answer, but I'm not positive. Please look that up for me.
It's a great question because I do not, in like most of these guys, they come out in the draft and that's the position. Then I kind of forget about them.
Right.
And he's a guard.
He's a guard. Okay. So I'm sitting here thinking he's a guard, but because he comped him, I was thinking maybe he's not, and I'm wrong. And then what else? If there were any other notes here, it doesn't look like I thought I had another comparison. Oh, no, I suppose I do not. Nope, I lied. Yes, I did have a second one. Here we go.
That's for running backs.
And it's for running backs. So this can be our transition right here. Perfect.
And Jacob Sane here says over under 1.5 running backs in the first round. I think Gibbs is the first rounder and obviously Bijan. And I'm going to start off this question here.
So to answer the question,
over.
Did he give us the over-under?
No, he said asking us over-under.
To set a line, right? So the line that I'd set is 1.5.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going over.
And you'd go over 1.5.
Yeah.
You'll think it'd be Bijan and one other guy.
I think it'll be Gibbs and Bijan.
Okay. Well, maybe tell us why you think Gibbs, because he's
my sleeper of the week.
He was your sleeper pick of the week from last Monday, and he didn't disappoint.
At least in his 40, I confirmed everything that I needed to see out of him. He wasn't the burner like the guy out of Texas A&M. I'm blanking on his name today.
Devon A-Chain.
But he had the second best speed of any running back today, which is what I wanted to see out of him.
He's a Corvette, man. That's what we were calling him a sports car.
We were calling him a sports car.
This guy's got some giddy up on him. The horsepower's real.
Daniel Jeremiah made the perfect comparison here.
Yes.
Jamar Gibbs is going to be that Jamal Charles type of player. He's going to be a guy out of the backfield that is going to make you miss. He just has that second level of speed that he can go into just like that. And I think that's qualities that one of those teams in the back half of the first round are really going to value and just snipe him before he gets to the second round.
Yeah. To your point, what is equally, if not more impressive from Gibbs is not just his top end straight line speed, but it's his acceleration. I mean, his acceleration slider is up there in the 95th to 100th percentile. Yeah. This guy can, and you see it on tape, you watch him run, and there are times when he runs 10 yards with patience, with vision, relatively upright, and then he realizes it's a one-on-one to the edge, and he gets the corner on a guy because he just puts it in fourth gear from the first gear like that. automatic transmission and he's gone, man. He's got the giddy up is really the best way I would like to describe it. He jumps out of his shoes when he wants to get going. So he was a guy that I found impressive. And I think his official time was a 4.32 I think he had the second fastest 40 of the day. The fastest 40 of the day was from Devon Achane out of Texas A&M, a guy that, if you wouldn't mind looking where he is at on the big board,
he was
the
impressive.
Consensus board, he was impressive. We knew coming into the day,
burner of the day.
Yeah, no, he was the burner of the day. I think that he had the fastest 40 time of the entire combine this year. And Devon Achane's 40 time was officially a 4.32. Well, actually, that was his unofficial second time. I suppose the official time has not come through yet.
But we were talking about it might come in under 4.2.
Well, the vast majority of the adjustments for 40 times all week long have been making the official time is slightly faster than the unofficial time. I know that on Friday, as of Friday afternoon, the average official time was shaving off 0.07 seconds, or 0.7 or whatever it is that would allow a 4.32 would suddenly be a 4.2, mid to high 4.2s in there. So he looked every bit the part for speed. Where is he on the big board in terms of guys?
So he's ranked.
I know he's in the top 5.
He's the 4th running back on the board here, ranked at 63rd pick right now. So he is a guy that probably teams are going to like finding value in that late second, early third round, maybe kind of like an Isaiah Pacheco situation from last year. Someone's going to find value, and I'm going to pencil him in the back of my mind for fantasy purposes next year.
Not a bad idea. The last guy that we have to talk about, we'd be remiss to not talk about him with the running backs, is the number 1 overall running back prospect in this draft, and really the best running back prospect we've seen probably since Saquon. It's Bijan Robinson. It's the Texas running back who is, for most people's money, a top 10 player overall in this draft, and a guy that for many is a top 5 or top 3 player. I've heard folks that I respect say he's the best football player in this draft, which I think there is a reasonable argument for. He looked every bit the part today. He looks confident, strong, big guy. He's not the style of runner that a Derrick Henry is. He's more a speed back, a more versatile back generally than Henry is. He's going to be not quite a Christian McCaffrey, but his ability out of the backfield, kind of a triple threat guy. He can run, he can block, he can catch. That's the kind of thing that makes, in today's modern NFL, running backs more valuable than otherwise. You know, the Derrick Henrys of the world have to be all-world alien standouts for teams to really value them, especially teams that run really modern offensive schemes. But if you get a guy like McCaffrey in a system like San Francisco's, which is quite modern, suddenly you have a guy that is a positionless player, something that many in the NFL are looking for. And Rand Carthon has specifically said this week to our faces, we need more positionless players on the Titans. Now, that's not saying that the Titans should get Bijan Robinson at 11. They have much bigger fish to fry, and they have a Derrick Henry on their team, who we think will remain on the team for at least another year. However, I do absolutely see no world in which he doesn't go in the first round. I would say that a great luxury pick of Bijan Robinson would be the Eagles right before the Titans at 10. Unfortunately, Howie Roseman, the GM of the Eagles, is just far too analytically inclined to pull the trigger on that. But if I had to guess today, probably the Bills would be the number 1 odds to get him at the end in the 25 or 26 or whatever the Bills may have in the draft. He's going to go to a team in the first round that can afford a luxury pick and add a guy that can give a lot of juice immediately. And unlike these other running backs, he without a doubt will come in, be the bell cow back for a team, and make an immediate offensive impact.
And that's my point why I said it's over for 2 running backs going, because I agree he is.
You think that one's in pen? So you're basically saying I think one running back not named Bijan Robinson will go in the first round because he's already locked in.
And I think Bijan's locked in, and I think that makes Jahmyr Gibbs a perfect contender for that Buffalo spot. Dallas, if crazy Uncle Jerry wants to get down with it,
throw away the love of his life.
Pick. Buffalo, Saquon, if he moves on, could be a Giants pick there. The Eagles, of course, but that's because And I know teams do not like to take a running back, and Mel Kiper hates taking running backs that high or whatever.
Well, if Mel Kiper says it, then
Yeah.
we have to listen.
There are a couple teams in that 10 to 20 range, like the Texans with a second pick in the first round already, a New England, a Washington, a Pittsburgh, a Detroit, who I could see them taking a pick to boost that offense, and which means those teams who need running backs in the later first round are going to be out of luck with Bijan and have to pivot.
Well, and the good luck, not the good luck, the good news is that there are a lot of good running backs in this class.
Yes.
A handful of which we didn't get to see today, others that we did, and guys that we'll be talking about more in the coming weeks. But for today, we are now at the hour and 20-minute mark of our stream. And that concludes not just today's episode, but our week here in Indianapolis. Just a quick personal note. We really are crazy appreciative of everybody that tuned in. We, weren't sure if we'd have 5 viewers or 500 every day this week, and you guys turned out in the hundreds each and every day. Super appreciative of that. Made this trip absolutely worth it, because it's what we came up here for, to be your eyes and ears for Titans fans here at the NFL Combine and draft nerds alike. And we feel like we did a good job of that. Learned a lot, got to see a lot, meet a lot of people, and it has absolutely not lit the fire in me, because it was already lit, but it has stoked the flames of my passion and desire to dive into this draft, because man, it is an interesting one. There are a lot of really great players, and the Titans. I was mentioning this to a guy who covers. Actually, I was mentioning this to Danny Kelly, who works over at The Ringer, as well as Nate Tice over at The Athletic. The Titans fans, as upset as they may be right now, you should count yourselves lucky, because in the grand scheme of the NFL, you went from being an exciting team contending for multiple years in a row and being 7-2 this past season, and then it goes to into the toilet and the season falls apart. But you really only spent a month and a half or 2 in misery there. You've now suddenly found yourself, I think, this offseason, at least personally, and you may be more nihilistic than me on this, but come on, have a glass half full attitude. This Titans team is in a position right now where they can choose their own adventure in the next 2 or 3 seasons. They've got a new GM that's super exciting. They've still got a top 5 NFL coach. They still got a lot of really nice weapons, and they don't have a ton of draft capital, but they have enough capital and enough cap space in the next 2 seasons to really, really make 365 days of Titans coverage interesting, because I think that they are one of the most interesting teams in the league right now for the reasons we've laid out. They've got a lot of decisions to make, and they could look like a lot of different things over the next 2 years. So we appreciate you all tuning in. We're going to start packing up our mobile studio here, which we've enjoyed a lot. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing.
One final thing here. Got to give a big shout out to Broadway Sports Media for helping us get here, supporting us through all of this, going to our first combine. We're grateful for that. And we hope that the content we made was worth it, right?
Jacob sure thinks so. So at least one person is pleased. Appreciate that.
It's been an amazing opportunity, and I can't wait. I don't know what the cards have for us in the next coming months, but
I don't know beyond 2 months from now, but I know for the next 2 months
love to be back
from now until the combine, or until the draft this year, we'll be grinding as much off-season content as we can. So make sure to tune in. We'll be back on our regular schedule every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, first thing in the morning. We'll have shows, maybe a handful of shows that are emergency pods here and there, but that's the general schedule. We'll be talking all things draft, and we'll go through what the rest of the schedule looks like in more detail on Wednesday. This is the show for Monday morning. It's going to be our show that posts either tonight or for first thing in the morning. So no non-combine Monday show this week. We'll be back Wednesday morning with a combine recap episode and get into our off-season content in earnest then. Thanks to Broadway. Thanks to 440 Sports. Thanks for producer JT coming up here helping me. Wouldn't be able to do this without him. And thank you all for tuning in to the Hot Read podcast this week. Hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe, go over wherever you get your podcasts, or you like to watch on YouTube. We appreciate those that are consuming the video version of the show. Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Go over and get the podcasts. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating, review, say whatever you want. We'll read it out on the show. Hopefully we've gotten some of those this week. We'll read those out when we get home. Check out our mailbox there. And until Wednesday, I am your host, Easton Freeze, for producer JT. We appreciate you tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the combine. We'll talk to you again Wednesday. Have a great start to your week.